I'm Alistair Hudson. This is Securities Law, Section D, the listing rules. What does city practice really involve? You're probably looking at this thinking, how am I going to make my life better? How am I going to be the lawyer I want to become? What does practice in this area really involve? And a big part of city practice in relation to corporate law involves listing of securities for the largest public companies. So what we've looked at in earlier sections of this course, we've looked at prospectus regulation, we've looked at transparency regulation, we've talked about how the regulations and the common law provide liabilities if there's some misstatement or misrepresentation in a prospectus and so on and so forth. We've looked at the EU background where all these regulations come from. But what we're looking at here specifically are the listing rules. Now this relates to the maintenance of what's called the official list. And that is the list that's maintained historically by the London Stock Exchange, but we'll talk about how the markets are developing in just a second. Historically, the London Stock Exchange then, this was its main market, that's the largest public companies, and the particular regulations that govern, over and above the prospectus and transparency regulations, the particular regulations that govern how you get admission to that official list, and how you maintain a listing, and also what happens if you do something wrong. So how you get punished in the form of censure and delisting and so forth, which we'll come to in a little while. So we are talking now about the largest public companies. And if you are trying to establish a large business, then getting access to this market gets you access to the largest pool of potential investors. These are the big household names, these companies for the most part, and maybe some enormous companies that are so big they're not household names. So the listing rules are more stringent yet than the prospectus and the transparency obligations. There is a further category of regulation that governs them. This all ultimately derives from the Consolidated Emission and Reporting Directive at the EU level, which is then implemented in the UK by the Financial Conduct Authority, which is now the competent authority in the UK. It used to be the Financial Services Authority, and that was the body that was in charge when these principles were first implemented. So this is very important in practice to understand how these regulations work. And what we do in this course is to lead you through those principles. Okay? Now, we've talked about the way in which securities regulation is structured based on high-level principles, and then it has much more detailed regulations implementing those principles. And absolutely that's true of the listing rules as well. So the course begins with the so-called listing principles, which provide very, very general principles which govern the ways in which issuers and their professional advisors are supposed to behave. So there are requirements of integrity, for example, the way in which you're supposed to treat the investing public, the way in which you're supposed to treat the market. That's all at one level. We also have, however, principles about those issuers ensuring that their directors understand what the listing rules require of them. So we have a very different tier of regulation here. So in terms of, to put it crudely, your assessments, looking at factual problem solving here, you're also considering those further rules. What else is it that we're supposed to do to satisfy these rules and regulations? So the listing principles operate at that higher level. We then move on to look in more detail at what the listing rules themselves. That's the regulatory rule book that's now overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, which has another hat as the UK Listing Authority. So many names, so many bits of jargon. It oversees those listing rules and their implementation. Just a word on jargon. This whole course is intended to be a map through the thicket. And one of the problems with coming as an outsider to financial markets is just getting your head around all the jargon. Now, two things. First, this course doesn't expect you to know about all these things in advance. The purpose of this course is to teach you all of this from the beginning. The second thing is that this course will explain all that jargon to you. Will let you understand that the Financial Conduct Authority and the UK Listing Authority are one and the same person, just dealing with different rule books in different contexts. Okay? So what we are doing is we are leading you through how all of these regulations function. So, for example, with creating the listing rules, going beyond the prospectus rules, going beyond the transparency rules, remember all those rules still apply here. There are requirements, for example, for sponsors. That is, there must be someone who will advise this particular entity, usually a company issuing securities, as to what their regulatory obligations are when they prepare their prospectus, when they seek admission at the beginning, and also on a continuing basis. So these sponsors are professionals who are expert specifically in the operation of these regulated markets like the London Stock Exchange, and how you go about the basic mechanics of seeking admission and telling the marketplace at any significant change in your business practices, your financial condition and so on. Because that's a very important part of these regulations. It's not just the initial listing and then you hope everything's okay. You have to continuously update and inform the market about significant changes to your business activities, to yourself as an organisation and so on and so forth. So very important, very practical. There's also a big overlap with corporate governance principles, which we look at in detail. Very important that a company which is on the official list is not just properly created under company law, but is also properly managed and run, so that investors can have confidence in the way in which the corporation is functioning. So there is a model code, so-called, within the listing rules, which govern how corporate governance is to work, how inside information is to be dealt with as well. In other courses on this programme, we look at insider dealing, for example, and this is kind of a civil law counterpoint to that. How do you avoid insider dealing on these big companies where ordinary members of the public may be shareholders? We want to encourage those people to invest too. So the listing rules is in relation to the largest companies, which therefore are going to have investors drawn from, the big institutional investors like our pension funds and so forth, but ordinary private investors too. And so it's very important that those rules really do seek to ensure that the right kinds of information are provided on a continuous basis to all of those investors in ways that they will understand. So this is core to how securities regulation functions in practice for the largest number of potential investors. And so it's a really important way of considering how these financial markets work, and could be a really important part for you of your own legal practice in the future.